5 Live Formula One.
There has been a twist here in Spa-Francorchamps. We were racing in Belgium this weekend. George Russell took the win for Mercedes. He took the checkered flag and he celebrated wildly, but he has now been referred to the stewards here in Belgium. He and a team representative were asked to report to the stewards at 6:10 because when his car was weighed, it was found to be underweight. They weighed it again on 2 different weighing scales, still underweight. So as things stand, it looks like George Russell will lose that victory and will be disqualified from the results. We're going to keep up to date with what's going on. We're refreshing our emails furiously, trying to get an answer. George Russell has actually just run past me to go and get his transport out of the circuit, as has the team principal of Mercedes, Toto Wolff. So I think they've left their sporting director, Ron Meadows, in the stewards' room to do battle and try and argue their case. But it's been a big twist and a turn. Harry, Mark, we'd just recorded some of our best work, I think. We'd recorded the Checkered Flag podcast. We were just finishing up the day, saying goodbye to each other, giving our driver of the day opinion. And then this email came through from the stewards. Mark, weighing the car, I mean, it sounds quite a simple process. What did it need to weigh and why is it such a big problem in Formula One?
Well, Formula One's regulations are massively complex and complicated, but the one that we're interested here is the minimum weight of the car. It's 798 kilos, so at any point throughout the competition, so anytime a car is competing in an event, it cannot be below that 798 kilos. So it's standard procedure at the end of a Grand Prix that a number of cars, particularly those that finish in the sort of medal, if you like, medal positions, will be weighed by the stewards. That's happened today, and when they got to weigh George Russell's car, having drained the fuel out, that's a key factor here, it's empty of fuel at that point. Having drained the fuel out, they found that it was about 1.5 kilos under that minimum weight limit. So what's happening now is that's been referred to the stewards. So officially the race officials will do the weighing procedure. They found it to be under the weight limit. They then pass that on to the stewards, who can then make a decision. Now the most likely decision, because this has happened before in the past, the most likely decision is that there will be disqualification because the car was effectively illegal. If it's underweight, of course, if you're running light, that effectively translates into performance. So that's why it's such a strict rule. It's black and white normally. But of course, Mercedes right now are trying to argue everything they can to suggest there might be mitigating circumstances. They're having the scales checked. They're having the calibration redone. They're reweighing the car multiple times, trying everything. And it's now in the hands of those stewards to decide exactly what they're going to do.
There are a couple of arguments to say why the car might have been a little lighter. George Russell did a formidable job to get the car to the finish, having only taken 1 pit stop. Could that be a reason, Mark, that perhaps the car was a little lighter because the tyres had been worn down more? And we have a weird scenario here in Belgium because it's such a long lap, over 7 kilometres the circuit here. The drivers don't do a full in-lap. They just sort of duck back into the pits and come in sort of anti-clockwise. Could that be a reason that he didn't have a chance to pick up tyre marbles, potentially to add to the car weight?
Yeah, that's standard procedure that all drivers are told on the radio. The teams do this as standard. They tell their drivers on that cool-down lap to run off the racing line. So you often see them sort of running over the curves, just running in slightly weird places. And it's to pick up all the little pieces of rubber that have come off all of the tyres during the Grand Prix. And that's really just a little safety net. So you gradually stick all that soft rubber to your heated tyres on the way in. It just gives you an extra kilo or so. Could it be 1.5 kilos that could have made the difference? Because we don't have that at Spa and everyone just peels straight into the pit lane without doing the cool down lap, they didn't get a chance to do that. So those 2 things you mentioned there could well be contributors. Heavily worn down tyres, and they were extremely worn on George Russell's car, and the lack of his ability to go round and do another lap and pick up the extra rubber.
Toto was asked that in the press conference that Mercedes held just a short while ago, and he said he couldn't comment because it was with the stewards. And as I say, it is still with the stewards. They've been in there for nearly half an hour. As I say, we will keep you posted. As soon as we hear anything, we will let you know. So on track, the race finished like this. George Russell ahead of Lewis Hamilton, and then Oscar Piastri completing the podium. Then it was Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen who made it up to P5 from having started outside the top 10 in P11. He was taking an engine penalty this weekend, which meant that his pole position that he got yesterday was taken away from him. Charles Leclerc inherited it, and Max dropped down the order by 10 places. But if we take George Russell out of the scenario, guys, if he does indeed get disqualified, that promotes his teammate Lewis Hamilton to the top step of the podium. He was a little bit disappointed after the race, guys, wasn't he? Because I think he felt he could have maybe pulled off the same one-stop strategy as George Russell. Maybe he's happy he didn't do that now, though. But he may well be inheriting that win from his teammate, Harry.
Yeah, he may well do it. And we said in our initial recording of the podcast that either driver deserved the win, to be honest. Russell got the option of a one-stop because he kind of had nothing to lose. He was starting from 6th place and he was thinking a bit more broadly on the radio, and it was actually Russell's decision to go for a one-stop strategy. And there will be talk, Mark, won't there, about, well, will Hamilton feel that he's been a little bit shafted slightly by Mercedes? But actually, his battle was with Charles Leclerc in the early stages. Hamilton had a phenomenal start to this race, taking the lead, and Mercedes had to react to Leclerc's stop.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Lewis did nothing wrong today. I actually don't think Mercedes did anything wrong, and I'm saying that with the caveat that they could well be about to be disqualified, so that might
we'll just
not
park that to
pass.
one side for the moment.
But in terms of the race itself and strategy, they actually delivered excellence on Lewis Hamilton's car. Got a great start, got himself up into the lead of the race, drove a perfect Grand Prix, really, managed his tyre performance. But it was only really when George Russell had this inspired moment when he realised he might just be able to get his one set of hard tyres all the way to the end of the Grand Prix. No simulations or predictions had the one-stop strategy as viable in today's Grand Prix. Nobody had done that. So it wasn't really an option that anyone was taking seriously. But George Russell, in the car, sat behind the wheel, of course, he could feel there was still performance in his tyres. He thought it was clouding over and it was getting a little bit cooler, which might help prolong that tyre life. He had a clear track in front of him, and he made that call. He asked the team if they could do it. They said, yeah, go for it. And then he executed it absolutely brilliantly.
Now, let's turn our attention to George Russell's teammate, Lewis Hamilton. Yes, the headlines look great, but Lewis Hamilton led the majority of that race. And I tell you what, the cheer that went up when he took the lead of the race was amazing. Everybody around the circuit obviously willing him to take another victory in 2024. I think he was disappointed, guys, because did he need to make that second stop? I don't think he wanted to.
Well, look, I think he clearly had, and he thinks he had more time left in his tyres. They weren't completely shot. But Mercedes had to react to Charles Leclerc, who had pitted first. They had to in that time. And I don't think it's a case of, Mercedes favouring one driver with the better strategy or not. At the end of the day, Russell started 6th and didn't really have anything to lose. Hamilton made a fantastic start to this race, leading in the early doors. But Leclerc was right with him in the early stages, so he had to react, and Mercedes made the right call when it was those circumstances.
I totally agree. I think Lewis actually played a blinder today. He got a great start. The team delivered an excellent strategy. Lewis executed it brilliantly to put himself in a really strong position to win this race. It's much easier when you're George Russell sitting in P5 or P6 to make a really bold gamble, as it was at the time, to go onto a one-stop. It would be much more difficult for Lewis Hamilton sitting in P1 to make that same decision. So with hindsight, you go back and you look at it, as other teams would. If they ran the race tomorrow, you'd consider the one stop as a really reasonable option. But in the moment, it was only that George had that thought process in the middle of the Grand Prix that changed what was a brilliantly executed strategy for Lewis into one that became second best. They had to cover off Leclerc with that pit stop with Lewis, and yes, they were probably going to be safe. They had the quicker car, but there's no point in taking that risk, so they had to take a pit stop, and it's a little bit like the McLaren situation last week, isn't it? They had to cover, although it worked the opposite way round with McLaren in Hungary, where they pitted Lando Norris to cover, as it was actually Lewis Hamilton chasing down. It favoured Norris at McLaren last time out. This time around, with the way strategies worked out, they had to make the same decision to cover off the third place car, but the strategy, unfortunately for Lewis, didn't work in his favour. I don't think anyone did anything wrong at Mercedes today.
Well, let's hear from Lewis Hamilton. I asked him in the media pen if he felt the team had managed his strategy correctly this afternoon.
You have to put your faith in the people that you work with. And so I put my faith in my strategists. I should be able to lean on them fully. I told them that the tyres were fine, and they pulled me in. Did I know that I was at risk of getting one stop by my teammate? They didn't tell me that. So, it's... but, congrats to George. it's great to go into the break with such performance. Now we can all feel a bit lighter going in and hopefully come back strong in the second half.
And quite a few opportunities in the second half of the season where you think this new car, in inverted commas, is going to go well. We're going to see more repeat victories.
I mean, it's very close between us, surprisingly. So who knows what the second half is going to entail, but hopefully we'll have more weekends like this.
Lewis Hamilton looks likely to inherit the win from his teammate. Oscar Piastri was the person who completed the podium. Of course, he won last time out in Hungary. A good, would we say, performance from Oscar Piastri and McLaren, or were we expecting a little bit more from the team, who look like they have the fastest car in Formula One at the moment?
I think we thought that they were odds on to get another 1-2 off the back of that fantastic result for them at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Qualifying mixed things up a little bit yesterday because of the rain and the mixed conditions, but we all knew that it was going to be dry, a little bit hotter today, and that would suit the McLarens, and on paper they are the quickest car at the moment. But Piastri did a good job. I think he drove a great race. The thing that cost him potentially a chance at initially taking on Hamilton for second place in the closing stages and then perhaps fighting for the win a little bit sooner was a mistake he made coming in for one of his pit stops, where he ran long in the box and almost sent the front jackman flying. Mark, he was fine, the front jackman. It was his final race for McLaren, so I think he'll remember that one for a long time. But that stop ultimately cost him a couple of seconds.
It did, yeah. It was an oversight by the driver, by Piastri. He just came in hot, locked the front tyres up and skidded effectively, and of course the front jackman, who's standing right in front of the pit stop crew, that's the guy you hit. I've been in that situation myself. I know what it's like. It's terrifying. Luckily the team dealt with it very well, but everyone had to shuffle about a metre along from where they were supposed to be stopping, and it did cost him a couple of seconds, and that meant that he was just put a little bit further behind the Ferrari Charles Leclerc. He had to work a little bit harder to eventually get past him, so that did compromise his race. I mean, look, he only finished just over a second behind Lewis Hamilton, and that pit stop cost him a couple. I'm not suggesting that's the sole reason, but it definitely didn't help his day, did it?
No.
It was so tight, that final lap, wasn't it? But Oscar Piastri did come home P3 on the road, but perhaps it will be P2 for the Australian driver. I spoke to him earlier just after the race, and I asked him if he felt he'd got the maximum out of the car today.
I think it would have been incredibly tough to get any more. As George proved, having clean air was massively important today. So, I think a couple, the pit stop obviously could have been a bit better from my side, but I don't think it really changed much.
I loved the overtake around Charles Leclerc. Do you feel like the drivers know what you're about now? You've kind of proved your worth in Formula One.
I sure hope so. I always try and race hard but fair and take my opportunities when I can. And, it was a risky move, but felt like I had enough grip to be able to pull it off. And Charles, to be fair, was very fair and gave me a good mental.
Are we impressed with Oscar Piastri? Because I feel like it was a little bit of a slow start for him in this second year of Formula One. I feel like he's found his groove now, guys.
Yeah, it was underwhelming the start of the season. I wouldn't say I had, big question marks, but for a man who was lauded coming into Formula One, he won in Formula Renault in his first year, then he made the step up to Formula 3, won that in his first year, then he did the exact same thing in Formula 2 whilst also testing heavily for the Alpine Formula 1 team. Alpine let the man slip through his fingers, McLaren nicked him, and he had a brilliant first season at McLaren as a rookie, but of course there's always a little bit given to a rookie in their first year, and going up against someone like Lando Norris, a future world champion, you're always going to have that little bit of a grace period. Second year, that grace period disappears quite quickly in Formula One, and to be honest, don't think Piastri was taking it enough to Norris, but I think he's turned that around now.
Yeah, I agree. He won last time out, but there's always going to be this tiny little sort of asterisk, perhaps in the back of his own mind, let alone that of other people, that he was effectively gifted to some extent the win in the Hungaroring because his teammate Lando Norris was told to move over and let him through. Now, I fully think he deserved the win, but he might always have this little question mark. So he needed to come out today and do something really strong, and he did. He dominated well over his teammate today, Lando Norris was not a match for Oscar Piastri today. There were lots of reasons for that. Bad start again for Lando Norris. Bad start of the Grand Prix compromised him, put him into traffic. But from Piastri's point of view, I think he did pretty much everything right. The one thing they'll be questioning now, should they have done the one-stopper as well?
Yeah, but that's so hard to question. It's always easy to question that in hindsight, as you said. But you pick up on a good point, is while both McLaren drivers are highly rated, today and throughout the last couple of Grand Prix, even in that 1-2 in Hungary, both drivers making little mistakes.
Yeah.
And they've been lucky not to be punished a little bit harder for them. Piastri running wide in the lead of the Hungarian Grand Prix. And today with the pit stop error, but also Lando Norris and another bad start, whereas it wasn't on the initial getaway, but it was coming on the exit of La Source. That's the first turn. Kind of unnecessarily running wide and dipping a wheel onto the gravel, which cost him 2 positions. It nearly cost him 3 more, and they hadn't even got to Eau Rouge yet. So they've got to iron those out.
As have the team, haven't they? Because we've seen a few little sort of tactical or strategic errors. But I think this is part of the process of you know, when you find yourself in these leading positions, which McLaren have done very successfully over the last couple of months. They're now under more scrutiny. We're all analysing everything they do more than we did before. And they have to learn how to think like champions. And I think that's the process they're going through right now. It is a learning process, and I'm pretty sure they'll be happy with the way the first half of their season's gone.
Well, absolutely. And moving into the second part of the season, you'd like to think they are now the main challenger to Red Bull, closing that gap in the championship. All the while, they are the ones to watch, aren't they, for the second half of the season, Mark?
I think so, yeah, because they've developed the car in a really strong way, and that's the race we're in right now. It's a development war. The cars and the technology that's in the cars will carry over from this season into next. No major rule changes. So everything that's being learnt now is not just building performance for this season, but also into 2025. So McLaren are looking very strong in that sense, because they're on this trajectory that's putting them right back up to the top. And as Harry said earlier, there's a very strong argument to say they've got the fastest car in Formula One right now.
And also, you know, look at some of the stats that people have plucked out. McLaren have been on the podium for the last 10 races. They are now consistently up there. They have to almost readjust their mindset now, having not won for so long. They've been on this upward trajectory over the last couple of years, and now it feels like they are maintaining that trajectory, and they are coming for Red Bull. Disclaimer, this stat was before a potential disqualification for George Russell, but McLaren have outscored Red Bull today by 22 points. This is a team that have 2 drivers in the fight against a team that only have 1, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in a little bit.
We certainly will come on to Red Bull, but I'd like to touch on Ferrari just briefly, because behind Oscar Piastri in P4 on the road today was Charles Leclerc. I'm just watching him having a little chat with a few people in the paddock before he heads off on his holidays. Ferrari seemed to have slightly dropped the ball. What is going on there? Charles said to me after the race that the car just wasn't fast enough and that they're going to be working on some new parts, but he doesn't know when they're going to be ready. So are we sort of counting Ferrari out of this battle right at the front now?
Well, there's 4 teams really that we would say are the top group, and it's Mercedes, McLaren, it's Ferrari, and of course it's Red Bull. But right now, Ferrari are the 4th of those 4 teams. We've only got to go back as far as Monaco, albeit a very different circuit to the one that we're on today. But in Monaco, they dominated. Charles Leclerc winning his home race. It was an amazing weekend for them, and it looked like they were back. But you know, everything I've just said about McLaren developing in the right direction, the developments that Ferrari have brought in recent races just haven't worked in anywhere near the same way, and that's their biggest problem.
Well, let's turn our attention to Red Bull, because they've been making headlines all year long, even before the season got going. This weekend, the spotlight's been on Sergio Perez, about his future, whether he'll still be here when we come back from the summer holidays. And also, they were making headlines coming into the weekend because we knew that Max Verstappen was going to take an engine penalty, a 10-place grid drop for him. But in years gone by, the last couple of years here in Belgium, he's taken a penalty, started down towards the bottom end of the field, but made his way forward and taken the victory. But today it wasn't possible. The Red Bull car is just not fast enough anymore. What do they need to do to ensure that they walk away from 2024 with the Constructors' Championship, guys, and ultimately the Drivers' Championship too? Well,
they need to find some sort of harmony within that team, and they need to have 2 drivers who are both picking up points. Look, Verstappen, if he had qualified on pole position and he was fast at the end of Q3, I think would have well and truly been in the hunt for victory, because he would have had the benefit of clean air. I think multiple things went against Verstappen and Red Bull, and in fact a lot of other drivers who were starting effectively out of position, because overtaking was harder than expected here. We're so used to being quite easy, but the DRS zone was slightly shortened this this year, perhaps a little bit too much, overcompensating from last year when it was almost too easy, and tyre degradation was less than expected as well, which is why we saw the likes of George Russell initially doing that one-stop strategy. But the biggest quandary that Red Bull will have to solve now is, what do they do with Sergio Perez? He started on the front row today. Okay, that was one box ticked. He was there, should have really been on pole position, but so be it. But he lost a position on lap 1, never really found himself challenging moving forward, and was falling back, and demonstrated how he could not match what is required in terms of race pace to be in that second Red Bull.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, starting on the front row, we just talked about how Max Verstappen was sort of hampered today by being in the middle of a pack, didn't have clean air. Well, Sergio Perez had the perfect opportunity to run in clean air. If he'd got a good start, if he challenged Leclerc off the line, he had the ability to win this Grand Prix today, and that's exactly what he needed to do. He needed to become Formula One's 8th winner in this brilliant season that we're having, but actually finished just inside the top 10, down in 8th on the road. May make his way up to 7th if there is a penalty, but that's not good enough for a second Red Bull driver, and McLaren are coming for Red Bull in this Constructors' Championship. Sergio Perez is not helping that. In fact, he's hindering it, and I think there's going to be some major discussions over the summer break at Red Bull. I think we may have seen the last of Sergio Perez in a Red Bull car, and I think we might get some changes coming very, very soon.
I tell you what, he was so frustrated talking to us all after the race earlier on. I asked him if he felt he'd been treated unfairly by Red Bull, by the media, and he was quick to say that, you know, he has a contract and yet he keeps on being asked these questions, and then he followed that up by saying, I've said all I want to say about this situation. But I do think there are going to be some talks. People are saying that it'll even be tomorrow. I'm not totally certain that that's sure, but you know, we'll have to wait and see who they replace him with. I mean, who's really a proper option for them, guys?
Well, Red Bull have a junior team in Formula One in the form of the RB team, where Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo drive, and indeed many people think Ricciardo was brought back into Formula One as a potential replacement for Sergio Perez, but actually Yuki Tsunoda has been the man to beat Daniel Ricciardo. Equally, there's another driver called Liam Lawson, who some might remember made his debut in Formula One last year, actually replaced Daniel Ricciardo, who'd only just replaced Nick de Vries, but then Ricciardo crashed in Zandvoort and broke a bone in his hand. Lawson got a few outings and performed very well. He's currently the reserve driver for Red Bull in RB, and he is chomping at the bit. Red Bull have options, but actually, how many of them are going to be better than Sergio Perez?
Well, you know what you've got with Sergio Perez, and it's not good enough. So I think you've got to make the change, because we've got half a season in which you can try a driver out in the heat of battle, in competition. That's a rare opportunity that most people don't ever get. There's limited testing, very rare that you actually get the chance to put a driver in your car and try them out. And yet this is a real chance for them to do that. So I think it's going to be Daniel Ricciardo. You move up to the main Red Bull team, and then I think you bring either Liam Lawson in to the RB team, or you move Sergio Perez down, depending what they do. But I feel really sorry, by the way, for Sergio Perez if that is what happens, because he's had an amazing career. He's a lovely guy, but he's not doing the job that Red Bull need him to do.
What a sad end to a career it could possibly be. You know, I know this is sports, and this is what happens at the very top level. It's a results-based environment. But you think a couple of years ago, when he was down and out back in 2020 and got that amazing win in Sakir, from last at one point to winning in a racing point, which many referred to as a pink Mercedes. Nonetheless, he got the win, and then Red Bull threw him a lifeline to replace Alex Albon, who was another one of the Red Bull drivers who couldn't hack it against Pierre Gasly, against Max Verstappen, Gasly being the previous operator of the second Red Bull car. And so this just makes me wonder, why does anyone want that second seat? Because you're going up against Max Verstappen, who has proven time and time again that he is effectively a teammate crusher.
It does feel like a conveyor belt of drivers that have sort of been binned off as a result of being Max's teammate. But if you're Daniel Ricciardo, you're coming towards the end of your career. area. I don't think you're looking to prove something necessarily. I think he's the one guy that's actually, although it was some years ago, that's really taken a proper fight to Max Verstappen. So, look, there's no perfect solution for Red Bull, and that's partly what their problem is. They haven't got another Max Verstappen. Even if they wanted one, they haven't got one. So they're looking at compromising and making the best of what is currently a situation that's not good enough. They're in danger of losing at least one of the championships this year, maybe even moving into next, something similar happening. They might even lose both.
I'm afraid I have some breaking news, and if you're a George Russell fan, you're going to be disappointed. The FIA have just sent out their email, their communication about the disqualification of car 63. Of course, George Russell, he has been disqualified because the weight of the car was below the minimum weight required, and that is a breach of Article 4.1 of the FIA Formula One technical regulations. So he loses that victory, and his teammate inherits the win. Lewis Hamilton winning then the Belgian Grand Prix. We thought it was coming, guys, didn't we? And here it is. Disqualification for George Russell.
Well, actually, quite a quick result in the end.
Yeah.
Normally these things can drag on for hours and hours, but the fact that it's come within the recording of this show, I'm actually quite impressed by.
Perfect timing.
But what a shame. Look, rules are rules, and you have to follow them. There will be questions asked operationally on the Mercedes side how this can be allowed to happen. But it does happen, and it did happen. And for George Russell, he has lost 25 points.
It puts a real taint on what was otherwise a pretty perfect day for Mercedes going into the summer break, doesn't it? Because this is an operational error. There's no way around this. The team have to be prepared for this. They have to meet the regulations. They can't have a car that breaches those. It's one of the basic fundamentals of operating a Formula One team, and they've somehow got that wrong. We'll wait to find more details, but it's a real shame because otherwise it was just such a brilliant day for the team that wasn't expecting a result anything like this today.
I'm just reading through the communications from the FIA, and it says that the team also acknowledged that there were no mitigating circumstances and that it was a genuine error by the team, because we were trying to work out why it may have been underweight. But that is the communication from the FIA, that car 63, George Russell's Mercedes, is disqualified from the race classification. Well, I said earlier on that we'd already recorded our Checkered Flag podcast, and then the news broke, or the potential news broke, that perhaps George Russell would be disqualified from the race. So we thought we'd start all over again.
Don't give away the secrets, Rosanna.
I did ask you before for your driver of the day, and I think we were unanimous in George Russell being our driver of the day. Do you stand by that despite everything that's gone on, or do you want to change? You are allowed to change.
I stand by it because he had no control over the overall weight of the car. He wouldn't have known what the situation was. Indeed, the team didn't know it until they drained all the fuel out and then measured it. So I stand by. I think the call for a one-stop strategy and making himself a factor in this race is what tips it over the edge still for George Russell, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Mark.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think he hasn't really done anything wrong today. He's done a lot of stuff right. I said earlier on when we recorded this, I think either of those two Mercedes drivers could have rightfully claimed both victory but also driver of the day. So the fact that Lewis now does have that victory, which is wonderful for him, congratulations to him, of course. But I think between the two, I would still give it to George, because it was a fantastic execution of a real difficult strategy today.
Do you know what? I'm going to change. Why not?
Ooh.
You know, I've got the prerogative, I think. I'm going to say Daniel Ricciardo, because he finished 11th on the road, but he is now promoted up to P10. So he takes a sneaky point. And could that, who knows?
Really? Daniel Ricciardo?
Yeah,
really?
but could that make the difference? Could that make the difference when it comes to that Red Bull seat? Has he now done enough? Has he scored an extra point to chalk up on his tally, to say to Christian Horner, I am the man you need to partner Max Verstappen once more? Look, I'm being controversial. I do think George Russell drove a brilliant race today, a real intellectual display from the British driver. There you go. I'm in agreement with
Maybe
you guys.
your driver of the day award be the thing that tips it over the edge for Christian Horner.
We
Maybe
do know they listen intently to the pod.
Maybe that's the thing, you know. Yeah.
Crunch talks tomorrow. Helmut Marko is going to play this clip back and go, Rosanna said Ricciardo was driver of the day, therefore he's our driver for the rest of the year.
Well, Mark, Harry, thank you so much for helping me digest everything that we've seen during the Belgian Grand Prix and after it. Formula One takes a short break now, a couple of weeks off, and then we meet again for the Dutch Grand Prix. Of course, that is home soil for Max Verstappen. So can he get back to winning ways in a few weeks' time? You'll have to join us then to find out. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.